Well, all the Australian politics this week will be driven from the Northern Hemisphere as the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, winds up his duties at the G20 leaders meeting in Rome and then heads to Glasgow to argue his stance on a technology-driven commitment to net zero by 2050. Now, already he's had to come face-to-face with an angry French president and has been heavily criticised by a British climate advisor over his policies before even landing in the UK. So he's in for a treat. Following the PM is our own Sky News political editor, Andrew Clennell. It's Sunday morning in Rome. Andrew, g'day there.
How are you, Chris?
I'm very, very well. What's the Italian beer like? Do they serve it cold enough?
I'll tell you when I have time to have one, mate.
So how did that awkward moment with Emmanuel Macron go down for the Prime Minister?
Oh, well, awkward's the word, isn't it? And it was quite interesting because they had the family photo of the G20 leaders, and Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden were nowhere near Scott Morrison. Over the other side of the room, there was really no chatter between them whatsoever. But it was in the leaders' lounge, not in front of media, but in front of Scott Morrison's official photographer, who just happened to be there, that the Prime Minister decided to walk up and shake Emmanuel Macron's hands. But the pictures tell 1,000 words, I think. Emmanuel Macron didn't look too thrilled. And the other difficulty here, as you know, is Joe Biden really put Scott Morrison in it. And by saying that it was handled clumsily, and the Americans believed that, there wasn't enough notice, that there had been notice from the French when there, in fact, hadn't been that notice. Well, the Australians dispute that. Scott Morrison disputes that. He says the US and UK will let know every step of the way on the way to making the August agreement to get the nuclear submarine technology from the US and UK, where the French were at with their submarine contract. But that's not the message Joe Biden gave Emmanuel Macron. So there's no bilateral between Morrison and Biden. There's no bilateral between Morrison and Macron. Scott Morrison met the Indonesian President Joko Widodo, who then tweeted a picture of him with Morrison and a picture with him with Macron. So he got a bilateral meeting. It hasn't been the most comfortable experience. And now, of course, he goes to Glasgow, where, as you pointed out, there'll probably be some more criticism of the Prime Minister. But it's such a fly-in, fly-out visit. I guess that's one of the reasons for it. Yeah,
you spoke with the boss of the OECD, Australia's own, Mathias, who's become a very green international diplomat, Andrew.
Well, what a convert, eh? This just shows what happens when you take on a different role. And I guess there's a particularly European view of how to deal with climate change. But, he basically said we need a carbon price, having opposed Julia Gillard's carbon tax, and said it was a hoax in terms of reducing emissions. But he defends his previous position or his current position by saying every country needs a carbon price. Otherwise, you're just pushing emissions onto other countries. Well, I said to him, well, what about China and India? How on earth is that going to happen? They say they're developing countries and they refuse to do that sort of thing. He says the OECD got a global agreement on tax, which included Russia, China and India. So why can't they do the same again on climate? But interestingly too, Chris, he suggested that he'd lobbied Scott Morrison to not only do net zero, which he congratulated him for that target by 2050, but a medium-term target, a stronger medium-term target, which of course Scott Morrison hasn't done. So let's hear a bit of what Mathias Cormann had to say.
In theory, an explicit price on carbon will be the most effective, but there are...
So carbon tax?
Well, no, in theory, an equally consistently applied price on carbon globally could be the most efficient. But the problem is, if you don't have a consistently applied arrangement, you'll end up with price distortions, carbon leakage and the shifting of emissions into other parts of the world. So you need to find ways to resolve that.
That's a tax, come on. Now, what's on the agenda today?
Well, a bunch more bilateral meetings for Scott Morrison. The reason it's so noisy here, we're near the Trevi Fountain. I think the leaders are going to be taken down there for a bit of a tour. But Scott Morrison's meeting the Korean President, the Singaporean Prime Minister, the European Commission President. As I said, no Joe Biden, no Emmanuel Macron. Yesterday he met the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. and then he flies on to Glasgow. But Joe Biden's also hosting a summit on supply chains, and there's a speech even before he gets to Glasgow where Scott Morrison again pushes this line, it's technology, not taxes, that's going to do the trick, Chris, on climate.
How will he fare, do you think, in Glasgow? He's got to confront Rudd, Turnbull. The Poms are already getting stuck into him. How will he fare?
Well, it's all about avoiding that uncomfortable moment, I suppose. Like I say, I think it's quite deliberate to only be there 48 hours. He's only in the G20 48 hours. That's how long it goes for, I guess. But and he's only there for that time. So there's a bit of a feeling that Angus Taylor, who stays on, cops a bit more flack. But in general, the conference is in a bit of trouble, I think, Chris, because there's no Chinese president there. They're the world's biggest emitter, something like a quarter of the emissions. The third biggest emitter's not there. Boris Johnson's already lowering expectations. So sure, there'll be some focus on us to do more, but a lot of focus too on an international front, from just a failure to reach a global agreement that's good enough is probably likely to be the outcome. But yeah, as I say, Scott Morrison, let's listen to him. He maintains that the only way you can get these countries on board is through technology, but he says we trusted the scientists over the COVID vaccine, so trust them over this as well to find us a solution.
There is quite a strong view, I think, emerging that technology here is what is going to solve this problem. And you've heard me make the comparison before, and that is the world didn't need a summit to develop a vaccine in response to COVID. The world didn't need a summit to actually ensure we went from analogue to digital. And we're still dealing, that is the nature of the change that we need to see occur here over the next 30 years to achieve net zero by 2050.
All right, Andrew, I'll leave you to flip a coin into the Trevi and get on chasing the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Chris.
Good on you. Andrew Clennell in Rome.